All right, I think we're gonna get started here. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Dave Nichols. I'm the executive director here. I want to thank you for coming out on a Saturday. This is a little unusual for us, but man, quite the turnouts. Thank you for that. So a couple of quick things. If you're a member with us, thank you. If you're not, consider becoming a member with us so that we can keep doing great programs like these and all the other ones that we do throughout the year. So we have a couple of fun programs coming up, which is kind of why it encouraged me to do this particular program. So quick plug now, because I might not catch all of you later. We have a Rendezvous and History Festival next weekend in North Alexander Park. So sort of Civil War, fur trade through the Civil War era living history event. So if you've got time, we encourage you to come down for that. And that ties in very well to our topic today. So please join me in welcoming our speaker, Corrine.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm very pleased to be here. This is the second time I've been invited, and you have such a beautiful museum, and you have great members. Thank you for coming. I do especially thank you for coming on a Saturday, especially with this beautiful weather. But I thank you for your time. It's very kind of you and generous to come today. The program today is called The Story of Us All, and it is a program about the Metis in Minnesota. And in 1679, the reason I'm starting with this date is that in 1679, a man named Daniel Gray Solon, Sir Duluth, which comes into Duluth. They switch a few letters around. He was given the opportunity to head west, to cross Lake Superior and come down the canal in Duluth, right by Grandma's Restaurant. So if you've been in that area, you're familiar where he took the canal down the St. Louis River, down to an ancient Ojibwe village, which known as Fond du Lac. And his job that he was given by the government at New France in Montreal was to meet with the Ojibwe and to meet with the Dakota or Sioux, as they were called, to see if they would work together with the French to develop the fur trade. The French government thought if all of them worked together instead of working separately, and there was no warfare between the Dakota and the Ojibwe, profits would be increased. And that worked out very well. They had a great meeting at Fond du Lac in 1679, and from there, Daniel Gray Solon, Duluth, headed a little farther west and wintered at the villages that were at Mille Lacs. And at that time, they were not Ojibwe. They were all Dakota or Sioux. When we do programs, no one ever does a program alone. And so if you just take a few moments and look at some of the individuals that I worked with on this program, and especially some of the slides that you will see, people that either have given me permission to use, have photographed these places, or in many cases my family has photographed them, or various libraries have collected over the years and kindly given me permission of use to use. Now, this particular slide is from the Savannah Portage State Park at McGregor, Minnesota. And after Gray Solon, Duluth, left Fond du Lac, he went down the St. Louis River and eventually connected up with Savannah River and then the East Savannah River, and finally this little portage which connects him into the Savannah State Park at McGregor, Minnesota. This connects with the Mississippi, and And once you connect with the Mississippi, you can go all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico or Gulf of America. And so this, you know, for people working in the fur trade, discovering these different portages, these different waterways, was what they did to just increase this fur trade business to another business that this continent has never seen before or since. This particular document is from July 22nd, 1824, and it's signed by Robert Stewart, who was working for John Jacob Astor, who owned the American Fur Company. It was signed at Mackinac Island, and on the right side, you have a list of all the licensed fur traders. And then you'll see some of their names on the left side also. But there's a column of boatmen. Those are the voyageurs. Number 6 is my great-great-grandfather, Joseph Majo. This was his second trip coming in to, as they called it, the interior. He was from near Montreal at Sorel, and he would continue working in the fur trade as a voyageur until the mid-1830s. But the interesting thing about the men that you see listed, many of them, including my great-great-grandfather, and most of the names on the far left, if they were not already Metis, they would be fathering children who were Metis. And so this is what this word means. It's a lovely and elegant French word. It sounds so much nicer than some English words, even though, you know, they are very clear and it says exactly what they are. It means blended or blending, and it was from what was the original tribes to what it would become, this transitional group of people called mixed bloods, mixed breeds, or Metis, which is such a kinder word, elegant. And so the Metis were a direct result of the exploration and fur trade. And one thing that's just been a revelation to me is that there was such a great diversity of people. First of all, a great diversity of tribes that were in Minnesota. If you look down at the lower level there, all of those tribes were once in Minnesota, or in the land that we know as Minnesota. The Dakota or Sioux, the Ojibwe, the Cree, the Ho-Chunk, the Sac or Sauk, Fox, Ioways, and many of the people that were in the fur trade were amazing linguists. So they all spoke French, but they could at least speak another one or more of these languages because they were in business. And you want to speak with the people that you're buying and selling from. After the French came the English and then the Scottish, and all those languages too. So you might be familiar with something called the Metis Nation. This is a group of people. They are French and Cree, and they have a language that's called either Cree French or French Cree, and it's called Mashif. They are in Canada, Ontario, Manitoba, and all the way there, pockets of them are found even into northwestern U.S. It was very difficult finding population numbers. One article noted that there are about 80,000 speakers of this language still in existence, and the population varied from 250,000 to 625,000. So you can pick what you think works. Now, this was going to be the program until last Thursday. And we actually started on slide 35 because it just would have been too long. We have a short introduction, which we covered, definition, and that we have the exploration by all of the early French explorers. Then we have the eras of maps. And this was a time when every map was new. And I love maps, so I always include this. Then there are the waterways and the portages, because if they had a direct river or creek, sometimes there would be a little portage or an area where they literally picked up that canoe and everything they were carrying it, and they had to walk for a mile or 1 mile or 2 miles and make trips back and forth. So we know that sometimes it's been said that the prices that the fur traders charged were maybe a little high, but that was because everything literally was carried in and out. We already mentioned Daniel Gray Solon, Duluth, and then the Metis that are documented from first contact. Today now we're going to be talking about these families that are listed on the bottom. The Bonga and the Falstrom, and as I said, very diverse cultures. The Tolliver, it doesn't look like it should be pronounced that way, but it is. He was the very first Indian agent to the Dakota at Fort Snelling, arriving in 1819, leaving in 1839. Joseph Renville, an entire family of Renvilles. Eastman, Seth Eastman was one of the early commanders, but before he was commander at Fort Snelling, he had been assigned there as lieutenant. The Bottineaus family, he is Korean French, and then of course our Faribaults. The final mention will be, what about the future of the Métis in Minnesota? What will happen? So these are just some of the Métis, because as I said, there are hundreds and hundreds of family names, and it would be thousands of these Métis from the time of 1679 to about 1900. So we have mothers who were Dakota or who were enslaved women from Fort Snelling, and fathers who were French. Chief Cloudman, Francois Labath, Joseph Godfrey, you might have heard of him. And then there were the mothers who were Dakota and the fathers who were American heritage. So we have Helen Hastings Sibley, the oldest child of who would become the governor, Henry Hastings Sibley, when he was working at the fur trade site in Mendota. Nancy McClure Faribault Huggins. She was a daughter of Lieutenant McClure, and he was so heartbroken when he had to leave her behind, and he had left money for her education, but somehow or another it was lost. So she would first marry David Faribault, who was a son of Jean-Baptiste, at the Traverse des Sioux Treaty in 1851 in July, when she was just 15, and this was his second wife. His first wife had died, and his son, David Faribault Jr., was just maybe a couple years younger than she was. Baptiste Campbell, big family of Campbells of interpreters and fur traders in Mendota. He eventually would be executed at Mankato. And then Sophia Prescott, the daughter of Philander and the Dakota woman, Julia Prescott. They said she sang like a little songbird. This is one of the postcards that's available for you. This is the only picture thought to have been photographed during the Dakota War. It's called Escape Over the Prairie, and the back row of people are all of Métis heritage. So there's two young ladies in the forefront there, and a little child down here on the bottom left. But the one with the dark hair, it said that Adrian Ebel, the photographer, specifically put her there because he was trying to lay out the photograph and make it beautiful. And she was beautiful, and so he put her there. But her mother is watching from the back there. She's got a little cap on, and she's watching what's going on. This is another document that might be of interest. This is Father Ravo's baptismal listing. He baptized a number of the Dakota who were going to be executed. And even though many of them had already been baptized once previously, many of them were thinking, well, once is good, perhaps twice will be good too. Anyway, there's a number of Metis listed here, including Henry Malord, who lived in Mendota. And now we're to our first group of Metis people. They are the couple Marguerite Bonga, and if you've heard of George Bonga, he was a very well-known fur trader. And her husband, oh, I spelled Jacob's name wrong, I'm so sorry, poor Jacob. Anyway, they would eventually live in Afton, but they came a very long distance over their lifetimes.
So was George Bonga her son? Was George Bonga her son?
Her brother.
Her brother.
Her brother, yes. And they, interestingly, she is a third generation free black person. Her grandparents were somehow or another taken into, either captured or he took them under his control and guardianship, a captain from the British Army. And he took them up to his next post. It was a whole group of 13 enslaved people that he took with him, up to Mackinac Island. And the story, there are two stories, that either this Captain Robinson either freed all of these people when he returned to Montreal, or he died, and the people on Mackinac decided that they were free. So as soon as her grandparents, their name were Jean and Marie Bonga, as soon as they were free, they became legally married. They went and were married. Their son, Pierre, was a fur trader, and because they were on Mackinac Island, which was the center of the fur trade world, he became a fur trader. This is one of the old images of Mackinac Island, and if you've not traveled there, it's about 12 hours drive from here. It is a great place to visit. It is spectacular. Just bring money. That's all. But there are no cars allowed, bikes, horses. So you can get rides in carriages and wagons. And then at the top of the hill there is the old Fort Mackinac. It originally was across the Straits of Mackinac by Mackinac City of today. But when the American Revolution began, the commander at the site then decided that they were a little vulnerable being on land. So during the winter, when everything froze, they dismantled the city and they moved it over to Mackinac Island and put it back together. And so this is the fort that you see today. And this is another view of it. But it is such a beautiful and spectacular place. You look over the Straits of Mackinac because that is where Lake Huron and Michigan come together. And then Lake Superior is just a little ways away. And so this is where Marguerite and Jacob were married. So Marguerite was born either by Sandy Lake up in northern Minnesota or by Lake Superior. And Jacob is known as the very first Swede to ever come to Minnesota. Born in Sweden, got on a ship, it was shipwrecked, he ended up in England, took another ship with the Selkirks, and that was a Scottish group that was coming over to the New World, ended up in Hudson Bay, which unfortunately, you probably heard this yesterday, Hudson Bay Company went bankrupt. As of yesterday, they closed. 355 years they've been in business. So those beautiful Hudson Bay blankets, which were part of that company, will become priceless. When he was up in Hudson Bay, Jacob was took up with an Ojibwe family. He ended up down by Lake Superior. They were working in the fur trade, and around this place is when he met Marguerite, and this is where they married. This is that Fond du Lac site that we talked about originally. Must be the smallest park in Duluth. You're seeing just about all of it. On the left here, we have the marker, which was installed in the early 1920s by the Dear Ladies of the DAR, the Daughters of the American Revolution. And this is a marker, this is the same marker, but from a photograph that I took last October. We wanted to come and see this site because this location was so important to the fur trade. You might have heard of Grand Portage and how important that route was to the fur trade. But more furs went in and out of this site because you could go down the Mississippi or you could go out through the Great Lakes. So this is where they were married. And so here we have a little bit more information about Jacob and Marguerite in Afton. And one thing that there were a number of people who claimed that they owned, that they had named Afton because it means eve or evening in Swedish. And so Jacob is given that credit for giving that, but there might have been other people too, because there are a number of Swedish people and people that live in this area. And this is their small family cemetery. There are probably 12 to 15 family members in here. It's on a cul-de-sac, and this little cemetery, when you first pull into the road, is next to probably 6 multi-million-dollar homes. So they're in good company. This is the next mixed blood person. And unfortunately, there is no image of Mary Tolliver Woodbury, even though she certainly lived long enough to be photographed or to have a drawing done of her. And there might be one. I just have never been able to locate one. Her father was the first Indian agent at Fort Snelling, and her mother was one of Chief Cloudman's daughters. The picture on the top there is by David Geister, and that is of the Indian Agency. And then, of course, the picture of Fort Snelling, that is an 1850 image by Herman Meyer. And here is Lawrence Tolliver. He did marry another woman who was from Pennsylvania. They did have 2 children, but neither of them survived infancy. So Mary was his only child. Her husband was killed during the Civil War. They were married in 1848 in St. Paul. When they were first married, they lived on the same street as Alexander Ramsey and his wife Anna. So, and this is his obituary. This picture there on the right is from the area where the battle was located down in Louisiana. And this battle here was all part of the effort to capture Vicksburg, which was up the Mississippi. Joseph Renville. And as we see here, I have a quote from Jeff and Candy Williamson, and they're in the audience today. They are the direct descendants of at least 10 or more of the early missionaries from Minnesota. Reverend Dr. Thomas Williamson, his son, their son, and his, Reverend Thomas's wife was Margaret. Their son was Reverend John Williamson. Then there are also the Pond brothers, Samuel and Gideon, their wives, and all of their children, many cousins. So, but Joseph Renville was born at Kaposia, and he had a most unique effort that he was able to complete with Reverend Dr. Thomas Williamson, and then also Reverend Reverend Riggs, Stephen Return Riggs. And this is an image of him as a younger man. And then if you've ever been out by, I think this is at the Lockheed Parle Mission is in Chippewa County. It's part of the Chippewa County Historical Society. And the town I think that's closest to it is Watson, but I think it's closer, maybe close, the biggest town close by would be Granite Falls. So when he actually had a fur trade business and he had a fort at his home. He became a convert of the Williamsons, of Christianity, as did his whole family. And this is the hymn that he wrote. And every year, it's a sponsored event, the second Sunday of July, at the Lockheed Parle Mission site. It's between the Chippewa County Historical Society and the Minnesota Historical Society. It's the most wonderful event. Descendants of all those very first Dakota Christians and the descendants of the missionaries, and then others who are of interest in being here, attend a church service, and then in the afternoon there is a program. And between the church service and the program, there is a lunch across the river at a little park. But this is the hymn that Joseph Renville wrote in 1842. His wife it's considered the very first, or one of the very first Christian burials, because at this time, the Dakota and other indigenous people were still burying their people on top of the platforms. But his wife insisted on a Christian burial, which meant that she would be buried in the ground and that there would be a service over her grave. So, but his great help was that he did not read French, but he spoke French fluently. And Dr. Reverend Thomas Williamson, he did not speak Dakota yet, but he could read French and spoke it. So what they did to bring the Bible to the Dakota people, because this was a great desire of Joseph Renville, that his own people would have a Bible to read. But we must remember at this time there is no Dakota alphabet. This would be something that would be, it's a work in progress with the Pond brothers, Gideon and Samuel at Lake Calhoun. And so what is happening at this time is that in the evenings during the winter, Riggs and Williamson and Renville meet. And Dr. Williamson, he reads the Bible verse in French to Joseph Renville. And Renville considers it and then recites it out in Dakota, and Riggs and Williamson phonetically write it down. So I want to read just one thing here. There's a brand new booklet here on Joseph Renville. And this is what Dr. Reverend Williamson said about Joseph Renville. It said that he was such a talented linguist. I have often had occasion to observe that, after hearing a verse of Scripture read through, it might be long, and one with which he was before unacquainted, he would immediately render it from the French into Dakota, two languages extremely unlike in their idioms and the order of the words, and repeat it over 2 or 3 times at a time, so as to give us full opportunity to write it down. He had also a remarkable tact in discerning the aim of the speaker and conveying the intended impression, even when many of the idioms and words were such as had nothing corresponding to them in the minds and language of those addressed. These qualities fitted him for an interpreter, and in rendering French and Dakota, and the contrary, and it was generally admitted that he had no equal. So you can just imagine trying to translate the Bible one verse at a time. And this was such an effort that was desired. He wanted this so much, and this is where the first start of the Dakota Bible began. Now we have the family of Seth Eastman and Lucy. Lucy is also another daughter of, I believe she is a daughter of Chief Cloudman. And what is so especially sad about this particular coupling is that as talented as Seth Eastman was at drawing and painting, that we don't have a picture of her either. So, and these are two images that I do have, Ball Play of the Dakota and Maple Sugar King. Another two that he completed are the Wild Ricing, and then the very first design for the former state seal of Minnesota. And as you can see in this original drawing, the settler is not afraid of the Indian because the gun is behind him and he is plowing away from it. So they are, they're not in having any kind of a dispute, or they're acknowledging one another. Now we have Pierre Bottineau, Cree, French, and Ojibwe. Born during a buffalo hunt up by Grand Forks, and he is regarded as the last of the voyageurs, also called the Kit Carson of the North. And he was an amazing linguist, speaking 6 or more languages fluently. He could work in the fur trade with anyone he met. He founded Red Lake Falls, Breckenridge, Minnesota, and Maple Grove, Minnesota, and Osseo, and more. And these are 2 of the homes that he built. The one on the left is a Redwood Falls, the Bottineau home, and this one is restored. I don't know if in its lifetime it looked that good, but it's beautiful now. And these are 2 pictures of him in his probably midlife or in his early 40s, and then when he was an older gentleman. Alexander Faribault, born at Prairie du Chien and died here in Faribault. He had 10 children. He was the oldest of 8, and his parents are listed there. Founded this very city. And after the Dakota War, after the internment camp was dissolved in 1863, or the first part of it, he became the financial and protective guardian of, originally it said 90, but this week in some other studies, I found that there were over 137 Dakota that he had on his farm that he provided care for. And we know that he was a decent and good man. He literally put himself into bankruptcy to care for others who were in such need. Here we have a picture at the top left, and that is an old image of Prairie du Chien at Fort Crawford. And then the island, which is where most of the early fur trading was done, and then a picture of his grave marker here. Just 2 days ago, I purchased that top picture. That is a picture of the Faribault house, which is in Mendota. And this was built about 1836, right around it. And it was built by the same stonemasons that built Henry Sibley's house, which is his neighbor, right next door. And one of the stories is when the stonemasons came, he said he wanted a nice house just like Henry Sibley, that he could afford to pay for it. But he wanted his just a little bigger. And it is. So here we have a picture on this side of John Baptiste, and then we have Alexander over here on the right. And down here, this is a sister. This is Lucy Faribault Bailey. She was married to Alexis Bailey. And as good and kind and wonderful as Alexander Faribault was, Lucy has not come down in history so well thought of. Philander Prescott said he could not stand to go over to Henry Sibley's house because they could hear the children that she was beating inside. He said, Philander Prescott said, she had a great affection for beating other people's children, including the little enslaved boy, Joseph Godfrey, who spent much of his infancy and childhood at that house and was abused. In fact, Prescott's own daughter, Sophia, when she was 5, I mean, we cannot imagine this occurring, but children had jobs. She had a little job. She was helping out. And he went over to see how she was one day and heard her screeching because she was being beaten for something. So that job ended there. But that was Lucy, nothing like Alexander. And here, there is a wonderful collection of photographs that you can look online for. Arthur Adams' collection, and it's through the Hennepin County Historical Society. He was a high school history teacher and in the early 1920s. And he and his wife Maggie would travel around to historic sites, and he would photograph these to use in his history classes. They were on glass lantern slides, but here's a picture of the Faribault house here in Faribault in 1920, and here's one was taken just a little bit ago. And these are 3 of the people that Alexander Faribault was guardian for on his property. Teope, which means wounded man, his mother, old Betsy, and the man in the middle, perhaps you might have heard of John Labatt. He is a historian and he has a wonderful number of essays online. This is his grandfather, Philip Labatt. He is buried at the old Indian Agency at Sisseton, South Dakota, just across the state line. And he was at the internment camp with his mother, and then he lived down here in Faribault, and then he moved out to Sisseton. And his grandson now, John, is a tribal member through this grandfather. And just a couple of other things as we conclude. What could the future hold for the Metis people and also the tribal membership and consequently the future of the Metis here in Minnesota? I'll pass this booklet around. This is one of my very favorites. And you can see it is a working copy. These are all my relatives here. But after the 1862 war, in 1863, all of the Dakota lost all of their annuities through an act of Congress. Even the loyal and the Peace Dakota, all of them. In 1890, this man here, who he served as a Supreme Court judge here in Minnesota, he was Indian agent for the lower and the upper Sioux agencies in 1856 and 1857, Judge Flandreau. He thought it was long enough. So he contacted the Dakota, and they completed a contract with him and information to see if they could petition the U.S. government and get their money for all of those lands. Well, this started in 1890, as I mentioned. He did not live to see it. But in 1903, and a little after that, the funds started to be dispersed. Then, for some reason or another, it was stopped. In 1973, I was reading the Pioneer Press. And in the back there's all of those official announcements. And there was an announcement there from the Bureau of Indian Affairs that if you were one of those people, one of those descendants, that you could fill out an application Bureau of Indian Affairs would examine your genealogy and see if you were part of that peace and loyal Dakota group. Anyway, so our family did that, and there were 3 checks that were dispersed. No, this is 1973, and the government works at the speed of a glacier. And so the first check came in 1983. The second check came smaller, much smaller, and these were not very big, but it was a nice surprise to get in the mail. The second check came in about 2008, and the final check, because it says, this will be the final check. That one came in about 2017. So this is a listing of some, not all, of the Dakota Metis that have come. And we are not tribal members. We are called lineal descendants because we are not 25% or more. To be a tribal member, you must be, your lineage must be 25% or more Dakota. So, and we are not. So, and so what is happening now? There were, hundreds and hundreds of Metis in the early days. There are thousands and thousands now. In 2008, I had a vendor table at the Black Powder Trade Fair in New Ulm. And right across from me, sitting across from me, was a woman from Pipestone. And she was saying that her family for generations has been digging and mining this pipestone. And she is from a family of carvers. But she said her children, they can help her carve, and they can help her mine. But once she dies, they will be losing their access to that spot because they will no longer be tribal members. She had married a German, or German American, and so her children are now about 12.5% Dakota. And so they are losing their privilege. This is what's happening. Right now, at the White Earth Tribal Reservation, up in northern Minnesota, in 2014, I read an article that they examined their membership, and they no longer, the majority of their people who are members are no longer 25% or more Ojibwe heritage. And so what are they going to do? They decided, they voted as a group, as members, that it will no longer be blood genetics, bloodline. It will be your family tree. If you could trace your family tree, you are going to be considered a member. You will have to be voted by the general membership. And in fact, in 2022, and now this year again, there's going to be a vote on their constitution, which they adjusted, because their people are not the federal amount of Ojibwe. And so this is what's happening to our native tribes, is that they are no longer that threshold value of Dakota or Ojibwe or Iowa or whatever it is. So this is going to be the future. Will we be changing the rules, or will it be just something that is not really a federally recognized tribe anymore? It's really a terrible dilemma that these tribes are facing. Any questions? Yes?
The term Metis is usually referred to in Canada, and if that's the origin of the, and of course they're in the more distinct group and have a history of rebellion and so forth. And so I haven't often heard the term used for Minnesota descendants and so forth. So is that a kind of a new usage of the term, that is kind of adopting the Canadian terminology? Because it's not used a lot in previous Minnesota histories.
That is correct, and that is why, because the term Metis originated up, because it's Cree and French. And that's why I mentioned that it's the Metis Nation. And they are recognized by the government of Canada, and they have certain sovereign rights. But it is in these days where we're trying to be kinder and gentler.
Right.
It is a much more elegant and lovely way to talk about people of mixed heritage, because there are other terms that are not nice. I mean, even when we use the term multiracial, I mean, technically, there's only one race. There's a human race. You know, inside, we're all the same. Outside is where we're different. But the term Metis really says it all, because it says that we are blended.
Yeah.
And we are, but you're
No, but that,
actually,
no,
you're
I think
actually
it's a good
correct.
idea, it's great. I'm just wondering if is it terminology that the Minnesota Historical Society is starting to use, or is it?
Actually, a lot of historians, a lot of, and for example, the Bottineau family, because he was Cree and Ojibwe and French, and he was from up by the Canadian border, and went, you know, back and forth. That because he moved down to Maple Grove, that for that area anyway, they were all often called Metis, just because it was associated with him, which is a good thing.
Right. So it's a new concept in
It's a-
Minnesota.
Correct, an added term of terminology.
Okay.
Kinder, gentler, and certainly elegant, much nicer than other words that have been used.
Sure.
So, yes, but that, it's good to make that plain. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So you speak of the kind of the diluting of the family and the bloodline.
Yes,
Is that happening in Canada also to the Metis Nation?
I do not know. It could be, but there's also up in Manitoba, in that area of Manitoba, there's also a large Dakota presence. And I think because they are somewhat detached from some real larger populations, they might not be having that problem. Now, with my own family, my father, he was, his grandfather and his father were both tribal members at Prairie Island. That's where our family lived. But he was not, his mother was not Dakota. So he was no longer, he was a lineal descendant and not a tribal member. So it's already, and he was born in 1911. So, you know, it goes back many years already, and it's simply increasing the more you see of Western expansion and all of these families coming into Minnesota, this land of opportunity. And now, you know, when you watch PBS, what are the languages that are on the emergency station? You have English, you have Hmong, you have Somalian, and I believe there might be one more.
Spanish.
Spanish, of course, how can I forget that one? Yeah, I mean, who would have thought that in just 50 years, we would have had so many more families and so many more, because as I said, at this time, when it first started, it was so diverse. We had black enslaved people, we had black free people, we had people from Sweden, we had people from Scotland and England and France and French Canada, and Ireland. So we have all of these, we have the world here. And so we have this diversity creating this Metis people. The farther west you go, though, in the U.S., the more tribal members and full-blood people that you will have. So, but maybe as expansion continues again and again, we'll see what happens. But it's just a matter of time, and you just have to look to see that this is something that might happen. There's one more question? Yes, sir, yes, ma'am.
What are the advantages of being 25% or more blood?
It was just a marker, a marker. In fact, it goes back to the 1837 Treaty at Washington. By that time, this was when the Dakota sold their land, everything east of the Mississippi. And so that's why Cottage Grove was part of that property that was developed in the late 1830s, 1838, 1839. But Hastings wasn't, because they were on the other side of the Mississippi. They were not included in that land sale, okay? And so, and that was only two of the groups of Dakota. That was the Mdewakanton and the Wapakutings. And only one village had to move. Medicine Bottles Village, who was at the upper Gray Cloud Island in the winter of 1837-38, as soon as the ice formed, he and his people, his band, went across the river and settled by the Marathon Refinery at Pine Bend. But there were so many mixed blood people in 1837 already that their fathers demanded that some land be set aside for them. And this is called the mixed breed tract. And there's a little, if you look at the book on the table there, if you take a look at it afterwards, there's a little section there, it's by Wabasha, and they had land that was set aside for them. Well, unfortunately, they didn't all want to be there. And so the US government established, depending on your family, and those are all those families are listed in that book, how many dollars or how many script you were going to receive. And then you could take the script and you could save it. There was no expiration date on it. It was money. And you could go to the land office and you could buy land for yourself. And we're talking about families, each person, these people getting hundreds of acres. So in fact, in my own family, Joseph Monjo's children, and he had like 8 of them, they had like 1,000 acres of land or more, because he had so many. And so they were initially set up for life, and then they sold their land for money. So, yeah. So, but that's where that whole idea of the mixed breed tract comes from. It comes from that treaty, and it comes because there were so many of these influential fathers. I mean, you're looking at Norman Kitson, and you're looking at the Larpenters, and you're looking at Governor Henry Hastings Sidley, and then all of the other fur traders, the Forbes. They wanted to make sure that their children were not overlooked, because they weren't going to get money from the selling of the property at from the 1837 treaty, that everything east of the Mississippi.
What kind of money did this amount to?
Give me a second, I can tell you.
Was it substantial?
It was substantial. Yes, just a second. I'll just read one of their, let's see. So we're talking about so here is a Trudell family. So Augustin, he received 5 blocks of land, probably each block at least 100 acres. So they did well.
So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to study this and how long you've been at it?
Well, actually, thank you. I've been really doing this my whole life. Now, only in Minnesota, could someone who lived on the Prairie Island Indian Reservation as a young person marry someone whose great-grandfather was killed by the Dakota in Nicollet County. So I have Germans and I have this first generation, these people that came early, Germans and Dakota. And so I'm a direct descendant of Wabasha 1 and Wabasha 2. And so Wabasha 2's daughter married that Joseph Monjo that you saw listed. She was first married to Francois Labath, who was killed. He was probably the second person killed at the lower agency on August 18th, 1862, at his trading post. His wife, third wife, Mary Iron Shield, grabbed her little baby, little Philip, and ran over to her family for protection. They didn't shoot her. I mean, she was full-blood Dakota. And but she was third wife. The first wife was my great-great-grandmother. He divorced her, and then he married Mary Prevost Brisbois from the fur trade company, or fur trade family in Prairie du Chien. So we're almost to an hour now, so I probably should wrap it up. We have Wabasha II's wife, we don't know her name, but we do know that she was killed during the War of 1812 at Prairie du Chien by one of William Clark, Lewis and Clark, one of his men, that he did not like Winnebagos or Ho-Chunk, and that's what she was, and he shot her. And we don't know, nothing happened. I mean, she was dead, that was all. And at the time, Wabasha II was by Mackinac Island, because the War of 1812 was on. So, for most of my life, my family and I have been traveling around, going to, all of these different wonderful historic places. There's always something more to see. And it's really a fun thing. If you have an interest, pick out one of these people and read about them. Drive and see where they lived. You might have to go to more than one place. But it's great fun, and you don't have to drive far to see some wonderful history. And it doesn't all have to be sad. So if you go to New Ulm, they have the Herman the German monument. They have the college downtown New Ulm. You can walk around New Ulm and see some of the buildings that survived. The Turner Hall has a wonderful place to have lunch with murals on the wall. I mean, and it's not that far away from here, And if you don't want to have lunch there, bring your own lunch. Have a nice nap. It's a wonderful drive. And we have so much to see in the state. And that's what my family did. We were always driving around. And so with my own family, that's what we did too. And whether you drive out to Lockheed Parle to attend that church service, starts at 10 a.m. Gotta leave pretty early to get there. But it is such a wonderful event. They used to have singers choir members from the Dakota churches at Sisseton. And they would come and sing 1 or 2 hymns in Dakota. And it was such an incredible thing. It is such a beautiful language, but it's such a beautiful language sung, too. And it's just, there are just so many fun things to do in history, and things that aren't all sad. There are many sad things, but find something that makes you happy and brings you joy, and read about it, travel and find more about it, and just have a good time. And that's, yes, sir.
I'm just curious, there's a Renville County, Minnesota,
Yes,
and there's a Renville County, North Dakota.
all his family. He had
Okay.
many family, many of them. In fact, that Philip Labatt that you saw, that photograph, he lives in Sisseton, and died in Sisseton. But there were so many in his family. and they were all over western Minnesota and in the Dakotas, especially this area called Prairie du Coteau. When you're driving out toward Sisseton, South Dakota, out toward the Dakota-Minnesota border, you'll see in the distance these beautiful hills. I mean, they look like little mountains. That's the Coteau. It's just, that's where the Indians, the Dakota went out and settled. There are a number of little churches out there. You know, it's a treat to drive around. I would advise you not to maybe go to some of the graveyards that are on the hills, because, you know, they're more private. But, you know, stay down on the lower area. If you go up in the hill, stay on a main road. Don't go off on dirt paths, wandering around. We've done that, and sometimes it's not good. You're safer. Not that anything would happen to you. Nothing happened to us. But it's just better to be safe. And so one of the things to watch for is the electrical poles, and if you look down at the bottom, you'll see these colored stripes. They'll be black, red, yellow, green. Those are roads maybe you don't want to go up. There's secret and family Dakota sites, and so that's maybe better to be respectful and not follow that route. But those are put there for Dakota Indians who are coming, who are looking for their family, to maybe want to visit a family grave and only have certain, they might not have an actual direction, but they follow those routes. So that's something that's very helpful for them. Yeah, yes, ma'am.
Just a comment from your presentation, I have a new appreciation for the book, Canoeing with the Creek.
Oh,
That
yes.
It just makes sense that they were Cree here, and mostly in modern times we hear about the Dakota and the Ojibwa.
Right.
And secondly, in your research, the local tribe, the Wapakute,
Wapakute, mm-hmm.
were they ever kind of caught up in the fur trade, and are there Metis,
Yes.
Wapakute descendants too?
Yes, in fact, for this, when we filled out the application, it was a listing of both. So if you were either a Mdewakanton or a Wapakute,
Okay.
it's, because then there's also the Sisseton and the Wapaton. So those are, and so see, there are these 4 groups of Dakota Santee, the Santee Dakota. And so generally, when you see the Mdewakatons, you're gonna see the Wapakutes. If you're gonna see the Sisseton, you're gonna see the Wapatons. And they would say it as a Dakota person speaking, and I am English, speak English, so I'm not going to pronounce it as a Dakota speaking person would have said. But they would have all been, see, the Sisseton received different funds. They received different funds than the Mdewakatan and the Wapakutes did, because they did not lose any land. So, yes. Thank you so much for coming today. I appreciate your time. Thank you. Thank you so much.